Dude, absolutely incredible. I think I've typed this like 3 or 4 times now, but just amazing. How do you feel from that? I mean,
Feel good. The I think actually in an odd way, the harder transition was when we did the change from 100 to 200 miles. I actually felt worse waking up after a 200-mile ride in the heat than I did the day after I woke up in this ride. And I think because your plan had it sort of stair stepped up
mhm.
over the summer, so I don't think that even though the big end numbers were getting bigger, the steps were getting smaller.
Okay.
Um, so I
That's a
think that
good see, this is a good man, and I mean, I don't know if we ever talked about this. I've ridden long rides. I've never had somebody come to me and be like, "Hey," I mean, I remember you emailed me in April and you're like, "So I want to do this ride at NT-444," and I'm like, "What does that stand for?" Oh my God, 444 miles. Like, does this guy know what he's getting himself into?
Yeah,
Um,
that's why I don't know if I did or not, but I knew enough to know that I wanted to reach out and get some help. And actually, one of the reasons I reached out to you is your posts. I'd read a bunch of them online, and they were so detailed and informative. And I read about your 250-mile ride,
okay.
and so I saw those things. And I was like, wow. And I saw just how much you enjoyed it, and then I looked at some of your training on Strava and saw that you have obviously a tremendous history of what I consider really long rides. So I figured, well, if there's any, and plus I like the fact that you're in Tennessee. I know you're from upstate New York
Yeah, don't
originally.
hold it against me.
Yeah, well, hey, I moved here. I moved here from Boston 30 years ago. I met
No.
my wife hiking in Vermont, and my early career in Tennessee, I was a prosecutor in the DA's office here. And the story I used to tell people is all marriages are 50-50. My wife moved to Boston for 1 year, and then I moved to Tennessee for the rest of my life.
There you
So
go.
I'd, but now I saw that. I saw upstate New York, and then you're in the Memphis area. I thought this is great. You would know, you would know the areas, and you certainly would know the trace, and then you had that expertise. So it was a very conscious decision to reach out to you.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, I'd reached out to a couple guys that had either done RAM or coached people who had done RAM. And because there are different like philosophies. And one thing through my own training of trying to do this gravel Iowa Wind and Rock last year was 350 miles. And when I first got into gravel, I was thinking like, so these are really long races. No one really had been doing 8, 9 hour races. And a lot of people that we talked to probably a couple years ago, they're like, yeah, it's probably gonna be like a lot of sweet spot, like below threshold. And it turns out these gravel races are the exact opposite. And we're all coming back and realizing like it's really more all around cyclists. You got to be able to go hard. Like you're hitting these hills early on. You've got to get over things. And the more I talk to other people that had experience with this, I'm like, this guy really needs to be a good overall cyclist, which, build the FTP. That's going to be a huge thing. Get you to do these back to back rides that you did. I mean, you're talking about, I was going through the calendar. Um, July was big. You had an 11-hour, a 16-hour, back to back 6 hour rides. Like you put in the work, which was just awesome to see. And then I do want to hear about how you mentally felt. I think I have an idea because the next day you rode 6 hours and you're right back on the horse. But when the battery died in August, was that just did you just write that off as like whatever? Or were you like this? Like I almost feel like that was a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think in retrospect, it was a good thing. I had had a busy week at work, and so I think that even though I thought I had prepared myself for it, I obviously forgot to charge. I ride on a Madone, and it's got a power meter charger on the bike, but it's also got the Di2 charger, and I forgot
Okay.
to charge the Di2, and it's one of those things you don't have to charge that often. It's one of those
Yeah.
I would have thought I had done it, but yeah. So I got out there, and when I went, I was I ended up riding, like whatever 60 miles that day, and it started raining. Actually, there was a thunderstorm as I was coming up, which is the first checkpoint on the ride. It's like 55 miles. So there's lightning, which was really kind of close and unsafe. It's pouring rain. I've lost the battery, and Dawson, my crew, is sitting underneath the awning of his van, and he says, it could be a lot worse. It could be 6 weeks from now, and this could be happening. So
There you go.
we both laughed, and we drove back, and then just figured, well, let's and having a committed crew guy. I mean, he said, well, we'll come back next weekend and do it. I was like, all right, you can do it. And so I think having that uh, was good, because then I spent the next week. I took a little bit off my work schedule and really dialed in on it, and double checked everything, and then had a really good ride the next week. So
Really good
then
ride.
that was the 300 mile, I think, right?
317 hours. And
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what was the total time? Because when we first started chatting, I think you said a goal time was like 32 to 42 hours total time, if I remember correctly. Which,
Yeah. I thought that I thought if everything went right, I could go 30 hours. And then I thought, depending on how much sleep and resting off the bike stuff, it could be 32, 34. The Ram qualifier and the sort of cutoff for this event is 44 hours. And
okay,
so my actual time was 27 hours in 24 minutes. Of that, 24 hours and like 5 minutes was actual ride time.
I mean, you crushed it.
So yeah, so it
Crushed it.
exceeded anything I thought I could do. And I didn't, it's such a long distance. I had no, I didn't know I didn't know what was realistic. I mean,
Hmm.
if you go back, if I look at it, I think the four splits, the 100-mile splits, were pretty consistent in this ride, and they're pretty consistent with what I was doing. 100 or 200 or 300. So I didn't really drop off that. The whole idea was like not to fade too much.
Yeah,
So
you
I didn't.
finished well though. I mean, like it wasn't like you were so far from being like I crawled across the line, like looking at the
Yeah,
files, like this guy's still riding. It's
yeah. And
incredible.
it was, yeah. It's interesting. There were definitely lessons learned. Like if do it again next year, we'll give it a couple weeks and decide that. But if I do it again next year, I'm pretty confident I could take an hour off, but just by I could at least take 40 minutes off, just smarter transition stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
Five
then
minutes
I
here
think,
and there adds up,
yeah,
even on a 10-hour race, let alone going all night long. I mean, the dark. I want to get into that, but first, so I
yeah,
appreciate you letting me record this because honestly,
sure, yeah,
this is like I hope I mean this feat. It's just so far that even a guy, it might have been Patrick that I coach with. He's like, "What do you think about this?" Because I was talking about your training and what we were doing, and I'm like, "Dude, it's really long." I think it was maybe in September. I'm like, he's done a 300-mile ride. Once he did that, I'm like, you can gut out 100 miles if you really have to. But what motivated you to first even be like, I'm gonna do? Like, what sparked this interest?
Well, it's really interesting. I'm 58. I turned 59 in December. When I was 18 years old, I decided I wanted to try to run a marathon and ride my bicycle 100 miles. Why? I have really, looking back on it, no particular idea why. But and it's not. It's not like I was an outstanding high school athlete or anything like that. But I've always enjoyed doing things sort of by myself. So I did. I ran a marathon when I was 17, turning 18, and had a good experience with it. And then got a mapped out 100 miles from my house, and rode point to point with it was a Schwinn Continental and a knapsack. And so I so I did that, and I really enjoyed it. So over the years, my background's I've been a runner, and then when I turned 50, I always kid around and say gravity and age caught up with me. I didn't have any serious injuries, but it was one of those things where I just could tell after runs things are starting to hurt. and
Mhm.
and I had been a recreational cyclist, and I had done triathlons when they became popular, that kind of stuff, but I had not been a serious cyclist. So actually, a friend of mine, my running partner, um, was dying of cancer, and he switched over to cycling. And so we started cycling a lot together during the 3 years that he was going through chemo and treatment and stuff like that. And we had been running partners for 30 years. So that got me into the cycling and more seriously. And then I just sort of added more and more to it. And um, I don't know where I first heard of the NT 444, but I like the idea of doing something longer and individual. And the trace is relatively close by, 3 hours away. And so I went last summer and rode a couple 100-mile back-to-back days. And just the beauty of the place. I mean,
Yeah.
it's no commercial vehicles, no dogs, no stop signs, and no Walmarts, as it says on the race application. And so you can kind of lose yourself. So last summer, I thought about it. a year ago, but then I thought it was way too far. And then this year in May, or I guess it was January, I thought I could do it, and then in May, that's when we started, doing the 100-mile back to back. And when I finished the 200-mile ride we planned in June, my daughter crewed that. I got to the end of that, and I told her, "There's no way I can do it," because at the end of 200 miles, and it was just,
I don't think
it
you
was
told me
hot. It
that.
was too much. Yeah, I said, "There's no way." But I figured, well, just recover and then plan ahead. And then this summer, the July rides, because they were all on gravel, and so
Yes.
to do some of those longer rides on gravel, I think that gave you just some core strength, that that helped out. And then when I got back from July, I just mentally I thought, well, I can do it, just be realistic about your expectations. And it's when I rode the 300 miles in 17 hours, that's when I said, well, I might be able to do this faster than I thought I could do it. And so I just, using that, those parameters we set up, um, I actually, was able to keep going during the 444, and it worked out.
I think even seeing your confidence in doing the back-to-back rides, like you would do one on Saturday, and then sometimes Sundays would be a little bit faster, or you went a little harder. And I'm like, I think he's gaining confidence in like just 100 miles started becoming like, yeah, I'm going to go ride a couple 100-mile rides. Whereas most human beings, you train for the 100-mile ride. The 100 miles aren't
Yeah.
back to back for a 450-mile ride. Man, is so awesome. It's What were some of the things? So you're talking about taking time off in transitions. What are some of the pearls? Because you said there were a lot, and there was,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the unexpected. When you told me that temperature, it brought me back to upstate New York, and I like shuddered a
Oh,
little
yeah.
bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I think the best perspective is the rider. Yeah, I think the experience of the rider is you're looking backwards. So you're experiencing the event by what you just rode. And then the crew person, a good crew person, is looking forward. So this happened several times where, like, when it got real cold, I mean, it dropped down to, according to my Garmin, it was 39 degrees. According to the car thing, it was 41 degrees. So we went from 75 to
Ooh,
41 in a couple hours. And so Dawson he said to me, he said, "Would do you need to go ahead and put on your longer stuff?" And I'm like, "No, I'm good. I'm good." And of course, so then 15 minutes later, I'm pulling up to the van saying, "I'm freezing. I'm freezing." So that I could have saved myself 5 minutes by just being ahead of that transition.
okay.
Same thing about an hour and a half later, he asked me, he said, "Are you hungry?" He said, "You're burning a lot more calories than you are in these summer rides." And I was using, mostly liquid Spiz and the Tailwind. And I was like, "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." And literally 15 minutes later, I'm flagging him down saying, "I'm hungry." So pulled over, and then he brought, he's got a background in all sorts of trail running and adventure stuff. He's ridden the Continental Divide ride from Banff down to Mexico. So he's got a lot of trail riding experience. And so he had brought along these small new potatoes that were cooked, and then olive oil, rosemary, and salt on them. And
Sounds amazing.
apparently the trail runners go crazy over these things. So he gave me one of those. I was like, wow, this is great. And then
Yeah.
so he said, "Let me put a few in a Ziploc." I'm like, "No, I'm good." And I just grabbed a handful and stuffed them in my jersey pocket of these oily potatoes. And Dawson and his wife they were just laughing at me as I took off. But that turned out to be a real saving thing, because all the other rides I had done strictly on liquid nutrition, because I felt like it was easier to measure the carbs by the hour because I could just do it by the bottle. But I didn't appreciate how many more calories I'd be burning in that cooler weather, and I could have got myself in real trouble if I didn't have someone looking ahead. And then the
Yeah.
same thing happened in the morning where it started warming up, because it got up to in the high 70s on Saturday. It started warming up, and I'm still a little chilled from the night. And on one of the transitions, Dawson said, "Well, go ahead and put on your day riding stuff." I was like, "No, I'm too cold. I'm too cold." And 15 minutes later, I'm flagging him down to say, "I'm too hot. I'm too hot." So I think if I had just listened to him, as opposed to, I was stuck in my head of looking what I had just experienced the last 30 minutes.
Hmm.
Um, that's good. That would save a lot.
That's
And
really interesting.
so it's just, perspective. And then I didn't have a plan to not sleep. We had planned on both. So when we had done the 300-mile ride, since Dawson was there by himself, we made the plan that for since he's driving at 17 or 18 miles an hour, it's hard on him. We did like around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, a 20-minute power nap. So pulled over, turned everything off, and literally set the alarm 20 minutes later, and then popped up, and it was a mental reset, complete reset, and I woke up after 20 minutes and was good to go.
You fall
So,
asleep?
oh yeah, I fell asleep and was out, and the alarm went off. And actually, I was skeptical. Dawson was believes in these things, and he's worked with a lot of trail runners, and they do it. I did not think it was. I didn't think I'd fall asleep for one. I thought my legs would just be buzzing, and then two, I thought if I did fall asleep, I'd wake up, like you just had 3 beers or something. Um, but I popped up, and it felt good, and this was on the 300, and it worked. So we were going to do that at some point if I needed to, but during the 444, I felt good. It was a full moon. There was some mist on the ground at night. So really the only time I felt groggy was about an hour and a half before sunrise. And we knew we had to ferry around Jackson because the Park Service had, due to traffic around the reservoir, they were going to make us ferry 15 miles. That's why the miles were off and it wasn't
Okay.
444. And so our plan was, well, we'll just go ahead. I'll do the nap while I've got to get in the van for that transition. And that was the plan. But then once we got there, sun was up, I was wide awake, and there's no way I was going to sleep. So I just ate something while we were in the van.
That's really interesting about the nap, because intuitively I would also think like I don't want to take a 20-minute nap and then have to try and ride again. Even if I'm like, if my alarm's going off at 5 and I happen to open my eyes at 4:30, I just get up because I don't want to have to get up again. But I do
Yeah.
always think back my sectional volleyball game when I was a senior. We get to the gym. It's a huge public school gym that we were playing at, and I don't know if I was just anxious or nervous, whatever. But I was like, I feel really tired, and I got in between the bleachers where your feet go, and I laid down. And I remember my teammate, one of my closest friends, was like, "Don't go to sleep. You're gonna wake up and feel horrible." I'm like, "Dude, I gotta close my eyes," and I fell asleep for 20 minutes. I woke up and I had the best game of my life. So it was like, I
Yeah.
don't know. It doesn't seem like you should do it, but it worked.
Yeah, no, I think, and I've done some actual research. There's some research papers on it. I think you'd find it pretty interesting. They call them like cappuccino naps or something like that, where
Okay.
people are actually drinking a cappuccino or taking a caffeine pill before you go down. Because the idea is it takes about 20 minutes for that stuff to get through your system. Then you
That's
take the nap and you pop up, and then you're clear headed. And there's research that backs it up.
Yeah, and there's like
So
micro naps where they're talking even seconds, or like I think there was one about like there's the difference between an 8 minute and a 20 minute. I think naps are amazing. I will take them. Like I do think the refresh is huge, and especially now like working behind a computer so much, if I like stop, sit down, close my eyes, I'm like, okay, I feel a little bit back to normal.
yeah.
So what are some other lessons you think maybe that you learned besides listening to the pit crew as opposed to just your head and looking forward?
Yeah, and again, yeah, I think it's perspective. It's not looking back at what you just did, but trusting somebody looking forward. I think that was trying to think some of the other thing. Oh well, the making sure not to go. I mean, it seems so elementary, but not going too hard during the first 100 miles. I mean, you're excited, you're ready to go,
Yeah.
but every single one of the hills that I hit, I just made sure to back way off. Because in this ride, the first 70 to 80 miles is significantly more challenging than the rest of it. There's a little over 13,000 feet of climbing in the whole thing. But I knew from doing some of these other rides that if I was going a little too, if I was getting too close to the FTP during the first 50 or 60 miles, you just can't shake that out of your legs. And I
Mhm.
think just by being conscious and watching the power meter and then backing off, I think that was. And then the other part of it, and this is, I mean, obviously you and I've been working on this from the very beginning, is not coasting, just continuing to roll. And even on I was watching on the easy sections of making sure to keep my watts high enough on what should have been really easy,
Mhm.
just to keep it within that band. And that's what's helped me in terms of my overall speed is
Definitely.
on is keeping the floor higher, because the relative work you put in to do that is pretty easy, and the
Mhm.
benefits are huge. And that's what I've
Yeah.
noticed. Because I know a lot of I ride with a group of guys around here, and it is interesting that my overall fitness and just my overall ability to hold a particular pace is really taken off in the last 6 or 8 months. And one of the guys I ride with was like, How can you hold these paces that we've never held before?" I'm like, "It's not. It's this whole don't coast thing. It's like
Yeah.
keep
Keep
spinning there."
keep
Yeah,
spinning. I've even had a guy who won Fausto is actually down in closer to Knoxville, I believe, and we had raced against each other, and he won the collegiate national time trial championship. And he was saying one time, he's like, "Man, these 5-6 hour rides, that no coasting thing that I read that you tell me to do that I thought was BS, I can't believe how much that works." I mean, even just later in the ride, your legs are just used to pedaling. Whereas if
yeah,
you're, people are amazed when we first started
yeah,
talking, and I'm like, "Look at this ride, you coasted 40%." And they're like, "No way, not." I'm like, "Look at what the file says." Like it's
yeah.
just, we're chatting, we're talking, and it's just when you get your body to just continually work I don't know. I'm just the biggest believer of that. Go actually
Well, yeah,
like,
I'd say that's the biggest love hate relationship I have with our training right now. Is that every time I look at that file afterwards, it's like, there's no way I had that much time in
it's
zone
super
one.
hard. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a challenge for a lot of people, and I have put in the caveat for. I mean, there were some rides where you had descents and climbing. And I've got a couple guys that have like they're on a mountain, and I'm like, dude, don't kill yourself. Um,
yeah,
so one guy out in Tennessee in Signal Mountain by Chattanooga, close to you actually, Jay Coleman. He has come to, I think he said about 20. If he hits 20% with all the descents, he feels like he really
yeah,
nailed it. Because before he lived in Texas, and so he had all flat. So he knows what the deal is. And so I'm actually gonna be moving out towards North Carolina within the next year, and we'll have many more climbs. So I'm curious to see where my coasting,
yeah.
my zone one comes down to. So there will be a little asterisk there, but
Well, that's funny. If Jay lives on Signal, that's the same mountain I live on. We'll have to connect.
definitely,
Yeah,
definitely have to
yeah,
connect you guys. That's awesome.
yeah.
We moved
But
there
yeah,
a couple months ago, 3 months ago, maybe. So
okay, yeah. I'll have to reach out. It's a small little community, so I'll have to reach out to him. But that I think that to me is the has been the biggest change in my training is understanding that. And even if I'm not hitting it, that's still that's still what I'm working towards. And
mhm.
when I have to say, when I looked at the data the next day after this ride, when I saw that there was more time in Z2 than there was in Z1 over 444 miles, and I saw the bars on the graph, I'm like, that's great.
That's
that's
awesome.
that's what it's after. And then yeah, there are. I mean, I think I had written down some notes that I put in the training peaks file. I have to go back and pull them up, but there are all sorts of things that I wrote down about uh,
Let's see if I
you
have.
know how to break it up. I think that too, I didn't have the miles on on the data screen I was looking at.
Okay.
um I didn't have any, so I didn't have the miles on there, because I thought that would just be something that would drive you nuts. And then I changed my splits so that I was just getting a split once an hour. So you get one of those on the Garmin that tells you where you are. So I figured if I got something once an hour, then I'd know more or less where I stood on the hour.
That's interesting. And I think I'm trying to think if I would do that because when I did 250, I think I might have broken it into two rides because I was out and I don't even remember where in Tennessee. I was on some new roads and I was at about like mile 140, which I've done some longer rides this year, but I remember being at like 140, not knowing where I was. And I don't my mind, I like to know where I am. Like some people are always like, man, you ride the same routes very often. I'm like, I'm not an explorer. I'm not an adventurer. Like I'm out
Yeah,
for watts and that's what I like about this sport. And so when I
yeah.
was out there, I was kind of like getting a little nervous. And then I think by mile 200, I knew where I like really was. Like I like to be able to know like what's 10 miles down the road, what's 20 miles down the road, where's the
And me
next water
too.
stop. So I think I would maybe, I don't know what I would do for that because it has to be a little intimidating if you look at mile 75 and okay, I've got 50 more to go, that might be a little bit of a screw with you in not the right way.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason I think why I did a lot of the longer rides on the trace. I mean, there are plenty of places around here to do them, but I just figured, if this is where you're going to be doing the actual, ride for over 400 miles. I think I've since January I've done that first 100 miles 7 times. So
Mhm.
to for this to be the seventh time, and in all sorts of conditions, like that 300-mile ride, the first 125 miles of it was in rain. So to have done it in all different conditions, and then last week the conditions were perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it was
I
72
was saying a
degrees and
prayer for you,
sunny.
man. I was like, oh, I mean, that makes a huge difference. Any cyclist knows that.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I sort of lived in fear of what it could do. Let me pull. I'm pulling up the training piece file. See if I have the.
Yeah, you were talking a few notes about, the drinking maybe 24 ounces every hour and a half. I don't think
Yeah.
that's
Oh
too
yeah.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was something I was curious about. Is that the liquid nutrition? Are you familiar with Spiz at all? What that Spiz stuff
I'm
is?
not. So I used to use the Science in Sport. It's just like a regular maltodextrin type drink.
Yeah.
I use some Torque stuff now, very similar. Um, I was surprised when that was your game plan, but you had done it for so long and you had trained this way, and so I wasn't gonna throw a wrench in that. I like food, not necessarily real. I like bars and shoes and things like that. Um, and I do like to drink, but I'm only taking about 40 grams of carbs an hour from liquid. Um, so yeah, but it seemed to work for you. I mean, you were very confident in that.
Yeah. What I'd be curious about is I was always worried about not having enough liquid in terms of just dehydrating, because I know in the summertime when I did some of these rides I was drinking at least 2 bottles an hour, and
Definitely.
so this time to do the Spiz and then the tail. And the tailwind is that's stuff that a lot of trail runners use, and that stuff I like it, but if it can get kind of syrupy if it's too strong. But the
Okay.
Spiz stuff comes in chocolate and vanilla, and it must have been like a meal replacement thing originally.
Okay.
But I picked it up. Some of the Ram folks have used it as a sole source of nutrition across the country, and it's really good in the sense of you feel satisfied, you don't get hungry with it, and I've never bonked on any ride when I've used it. But my question was, and something I have to play around with, was I drinking too much? Because I was having one of those
Mhm.
24 ounces, 45 minutes, and one of the tailwinds, 45 minutes. So two of those in an hour and a half. And I was just surprised at how quickly liquid seemed to be passing through my body.
Yeah.
And so,
Hmm.
and that just, I guess, scratched my head. But the opposite would be worse, right? If you were behind that curve, you'd
If
probably
you get
never make up.
behind, it's over. It's game over. So it was 24 ounce of fluid and the Spiz, or 24 ounces total?
Yeah, so the every 45 minutes, 24 ounces. One of those had the Spiz in it. One of it had the
Yeah.
tailwind. So it was 90 minutes for 2 bottles. And I think you probably could stretch that to maybe closer to 2 hours, but I didn't want to.
Yeah.
And
I think with 2 hours, I think that would be fine. I mean, you did say you were peeing every hour and a half, though. So it was
yeah,
like, it
yeah,
was going
yeah,
through.
it was definitely going through. And I was wondering, like, how much time am I losing doing this? And I'm probably, I'm a little larger than the average cyclist. So, it's figured, well, probably if you're going to be error on the side of a little too much, right?
Yeah, because I think naturally too, if you're just drinking too much, eventually your body with the riding, it's just gonna kind of turn off and be like, you're not thirsty, unless
Yeah,
if you start forcing it down too much, you're gonna know you're like, I'm full, I don't need this. So
yeah.
I agree, especially for something like this, more is better. It's not
And then
always the case, but more is better.
you had a suggestion that worked out well. I know when I was talking about, because I had on the 300, I didn't use any food, solid food, except I brought some crackers along that seemed to just do well late in the ride, just kind of settle your stomach. And then you had suggested, you're like, crackers, that's the last thing I would eat. And you listed some things that you would eat. And you
Yeah.
put fig Newtons. And I was like, fig Newtons. And I remember from my running years, it's like fig Newtons on like really long runs I like. So I had a pocket full of Fig Newtons from 100 miles on, and it's amazing how just a small Fig Newton every 15 minutes. I
Yeah,
ate those things from the 100-mile mark through the 400 mile in my left
that's
pocket. I just got
awesome.
every 15 minutes I just would pop one in, and it was just enough solid food to
Mhm.
keep you feeling full. And then and it felt, I mean, I felt like I could feel the energy kind of topping up. So um, at no point during this ride did I ever feel like I got anywhere close to being in trouble. Um, the only I if you look at the files, you'll see right around 400, a little before 400 miles, I backed it off a little because it started getting warm. It started getting into the upper 70s, and what my fear was I didn't want to have some kind of heat event. It's like I ended up riding 405 miles and then over, right?
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
backed it off, and then once I got to about there was 25 miles left to go. I was like, okay, I feel pretty good. So just
It's the
pushed it in.
body does weird things too. Like when you were talking about the temperature things, that's what I've noticed on long rides. Like even on a, I mean, I'm gonna say long, not compared to this, but like on a
Yeah,
150, 160 mile. I was out one day and my like face was getting hot. And granted, it was a little bit more in the summer here, so I don't know if it was just the sun, but I think you're just burning so much food. You're on the bike, you're moving, and I was like, I could feel heat coming off of me, and it got me a little worried. I wasn't too far from home. I'm like, you know, probably not supposed to be doing this, but pushing things to the limit. But it was, yeah, I was watching on the app you had sent me throughout the day, and you finally hit. I think I saw it at 370, and then it was maybe you had taken a pit stop or something. But I remember refreshing, and I was like, he hasn't moved in a little bit. I'm like, maybe it's the app. I'm not going to worry about it. And I think maybe that's when I texted you, and then I was just like, I'm gonna refresh this a little bit. And it had, I forget how it like blinked or whatever. And it was like you were at the finish. And I was like, oh my God, he finished this. This is so great. It is so
yeah.
inspiringly. Like it is,
Well,
oh man.
my kids asked me and my wife before the ride. They said, "Well, do you think you can do it?" And I said, "Well, I can remember from my marathon days. There's a big difference between running 20 miles and 26 miles. It doesn't seem like it the average person, but it's like it is a big difference." And so the same thing with this is like I went into it with a real healthy respect that there's a big difference between riding 300 miles and over 400 miles. And so I made sure that even when it was like 250, 260, 280, it was really interesting. People, there were, the other crews are there, and you go past people, and they're like, "You got this. You're 300. It's nothing now." And I'm like, "Yeah, there's 140 miles left." It's
Yeah.
like, and your advice, you sent me a message a couple days before the ride. It said, "Remember, no matter how far you're into this thing, you have a long way to go." And so
Yeah.
I kept hearing that in my head. And so I think even when I got to the high 300s, and there are mile posts on the
Sure.
trace. And so most of them, I didn't pay attention to, but I did consciously watch. And I said, look, until this thing gets to under 20 miles, this is not done. And so,
Totally.
you could very easily at 40 miles out, um, mess up.
Done.
So
That,
yeah, that's why I was keeping it, within. I never felt like I got into a place where you had to dig super deep where you couldn't dig yourself out of it. I kept mentally saying to myself, leave a little reserve so that if you need it in the last 10 miles or 5 miles for that matter, it'll be there.
100%. It's
Yeah,
so we'll give credit to Whitney, who is one of my buddies who does ultra stuff. And his mantra is, uh, "There's a lot of late. What is it? There's a lot of later," and just always thinking like, you know, even 200 miles, you hit 120, you still have an 80-mile bike ride left. And so I was thinking of you when we were talking about things like that. And I thought of you when I was riding in North Carolina on the Blue Ridge Parkway because I started seeing these mile posts. I'm like, man, I never thought about that. Well, that mess with you if you're like, wait, it's only been a mile. I think it's good that you didn't really focus on them because that's
yeah,
like, geez, that could really screw with you. It's there's a team I used to race with out of Oklahoma City, and they did a thing called the Bermuda, a playoff of Bermuda Triangle, where you go
yeah.
Oklahoma City to Tulsa, down to a southern city and back. It's 420 miles, and twice a guy has crossed to like 395, 400, and it's just lights out. I think part of it might be the disadvantage of a group is you're riding at the group's pace. You're
Yeah.
like you're talking about, you're excited in the first 100 miles. You're feeling great like it's a 100-mile ride.
Yeah.
300 miles later, and somebody had offered to like, I'm going to try and push you for 20 miles. He's like, I need to get off the bike. Like, it's over. And has stepped
Yeah.
off the bike and gotten in the van and just hasn't been able to complete it. And it's just like, oh my God. You wonder when you haven't gone that far, how have you gone that far to get off? But I think you're so smart in the way you approached it, of having the respect for it and thinking 20 mile, like sometimes it's lights out and you can't do, there's
Yeah. Yeah.
no
That's
willing the pedals at that point. It is over.
yeah. That's exactly right. And that's what I mean, I knew even by halfway, I said, okay, I'm going significantly faster than I had, when I set the goal, when I had planned.
Mhm.
So I said, when I got to the high 300s, I'm like, just back off a little bit. You're going plenty fast.
Mhm.
Um, and when you get to the end, you can pick it up at the last part. Because I was concerned a little bit about that when it started getting warm. And I saw there were a couple guys I passed in the last 50 or 60 miles who were clearly struggling, that had
Mhm.
just, you could tell they were getting close to the end of their day. And I thought, man, I do not want to be in that situation.
No.
Um,
Well, so you finished ninth overall.
yeah, that I was really surprised with that. Yeah,
So cool. I mean, you have
yeah,
people from all
yeah,
over the world. Do
yeah.
you know how many people did not finish?
Gee, there were probably 6 or 8. I mean, one woman who didn't finish. I don't know why. I mean, she's an 8-time Ram finisher, and she has won Ram before, and so. And I was surprised she pulled out around 300 miles or something. Maybe she's mechanical. She certainly, obviously,
No.
is far more
I mean, you can
experienced.
have a
But
bad day. You can.
yeah, anybody can. But there were a number of people who, and I didn't know that. Fortunately, I didn't know that because I think that would not have been a good thing to know. But
Yeah.
when I, and I didn't, you're kind of this alternate state when you get off the bike. So I didn't really. I just hit stop on my Garmin, but I didn't really check any data till the next day. And then it was actually the wife of Doss, Stephanie, she was handling all the technical stuff. She the next morning we went out to get breakfast. She said, "You were ninth overall in this thing." I said, and they don't really because it's a National Park Service. They can't call it a race, but there's a clock. They publish the results, and they give
Yeah.
medals out. So um,
It's a race.
went through it. Yeah, went through it, and it's like, yeah, for a first attempt, like the fellow who was the race director, he said, "Well, so you're going to do Ram now, right? You've qualified for Ram." And I was like, "Well, this is what I was training for."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, how many of these have you done before?" And I said, "This first one." He said, "Your first over 100-mile ride has been this ride." He said, "You may be onto something. You may have an aptitude for this." So I thought that was encouraging.
It's wild. I mean, it's a whole different scene too. Like, if someone has done this is good for other people, like you'll meet a whole nother section of people, of cyclists, like because you go to Grand Fondos, you kind of see similar people, see similar
Sure.
faces. I remember when we rolled up to the ultra gravel 350-mile ride. We rolled in and it was me and my buddy Patrick. We drove out to Iowa and we rode over to the registration, and which I guess was a weird thing. People were like, "Did you ride over here?" We're like, "Yeah, the hotel's like right down the street." We rolled over in our kits. We were like kind of just doing like making sure our bikes were ready to go, and we didn't know anybody, and people were kind of looking at us like, "Who are these two guys?" And it
Yeah.
was funny. It was just a totally different scene. It was a really cool experience. I was hopefully going to maybe go do, they call it horseshoe. I forget what the name of the race is now. Speckled horse. And it was going to be 200 miles. I think it got shortened because of like some course issue to 150 miles and like 20,000 feet of climbing or something. But because
Whew.
of COVID, I'm still kind of riding solo. So hopefully maybe next year. But yeah, it's something else, man. I just really, I still have a
I'll say,
hard
yeah,
time wrapping my mind
the,
around
the
that number.
yeah, I agree. The group of people that we met out there, everybody was welcoming. It's interesting. I guess it's a self-selecting group. Everybody knew what the heck they were doing. I mean, when you get out, you get out into the parking lot area, and of course, with COVID, everybody's socially distanced and far apart, and the start times were like every 10 or 15 minutes. But you could just tell people were moving with a sense of efficiency, and they had things organized, and you'd see other crews along the way. And you're like, yeah, these folks know what they're doing, and everyone was very welcoming to
Yeah,
us. And this is brand new for me and for Dawson and Stephanie. We'd none of us had done anything like it before, so it was a great experience from top to bottom in terms of
that's amazing. What do you
role playing.
think for somebody watching this that you're going to inspire a ton of people? I mean, I don't like to be ageist, but the fact I was telling my husband that you had done this, and he rode 450 miles in a month. I said no, in a day. And he's like, wait, how old is this guy? And I was like, I mean, that is, I still tell people when I did my first, so I was a Cat 5, I went to do this local race. I think I came in like 14th or something, and I looked at the list, and they used to post ages. They don't always do it. And there was a guy who was 57, and a guy who was 53, and I'm looking through it, and I'm like, and I was 26. I'm like, how the hell did I get beat by these guys? And
Yeah,
there's always a local, rider that, guys at home that watch. Todd Craig is this guy who's this diesel monster. And, he taught me one thing in a bike race. He's like, you want to know how, we're literally in a race. He's like, you want to know how to drop me? And I'm like, yeah, I just couldn't get rid of this guy. He's like, change paces. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, slow down and then go hard. I won't be able to keep up. And I'm like, why is this guy telling me? He didn't really care about the race. He's raced his whole life. He wanted
sure.
to and grow and whatever. But what are maybe 3 things that I think you were prepared. I don't want to steer your thunder. What are 3 things that if someone's like, man, I want to make a big goal? Maybe someone who's only ridden 30 miles and wants to go to 100 miles or 100 miles.
Yeah,
What are 3
I
things that you
think too.
share with them?
I think the first thing, and I learned this early on from our working together, is don't get yourself blown up by your local group rides. Those things, they're enjoyable. I mean, I still like riding with the guys a couple times a month. But if if you have a goal, something like this, you do that once a week.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very different path
Totally.
than trying to get to something long like that. And I think that on the I don't have a background in racing bicycles, so if you show up on these group rides and the perception is, well, everybody's at the same level of either fitness or level of rest. Of course, they're not. There's some guys who are rested and who are treating this like a race. Other guys are coming into it as a training experience, and they can derail more than just a day or two. I think it can derail your week or cycle. And so, wrapping my head around that real early on was important. And we put in the schedule a few times, like free ride to which you feel like doing. And so it was great to then go on those days, go ride with the guys and do
Mm-hmm.
whatever happens, but to have the discipline to stay with the plan. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's probably the most important thing. And then I think number 2 is, don't be afraid to have a really big long-term goal. Like the 400 plus ride. I don't think there's any reasonable way, if we were talking about this a year ago, you couldn't look at it and say that's realistic given where you are right now. But set benchmarks in between. It's those steps we were talking about. And so to go from 100 to 200, that's a 100% increase. But
Mm-hmm.
200 to 300 is only a 33% increase, and 300 to 400 is only a 25% increase. So I think that it actually gets easier the deeper you go into the training. And then probably the most important thing I've learned from our working together is the benefit of those rest cycles, is to truly be
Yes.
disciplined on the rest. And that's true. I mean, I've always believed in rest, but I mean, you've got me paying attention to the sleep and the nutrition on the rest days. And if I treat that as, I sort of block that off and make sure even to not let outside activities on those rest days, take my energy in a different direction. And so that, the first couple times I did that, and then coming back into a new cycle, I was like, wow, this is something. How it builds, there's a snowball effect over cycles.
It is incredible. And I think you have that. You just said it like, when you're talking about the group ride, not only kind of taking things down the road for the next couple of days, it can screw the cycle up, and people don't necessarily see that. Those are the athletes more that I try to explain to them. You're just exercising. You're not building. You're going out and getting tired and getting very tired. And neuromuscular fatigue is a massive thing that it snowballs. And so when you're saying these rest cycles, the number of people that are like, man, two things. Number one, you make me train way harder than I ever would have trained on a micro and macro scale, but you make me rest so much. And people hate it at first, but then they see the benefit of like, you are literally absorbing all of that hard work from 3 weeks
Yeah.
of training. Your body needs to absorb it. And usually after 2 or 3 days, they're like, I'm fine. Let me ride. I'm like, just wait. Like, you're
Yeah.
not ready yet. And I love that you said that, because it is such a huge component that, I mean, even in my own calendar, I put in the rest week, because by Wednesday I'm like, I want to go ride 60 miles, but like, that's not the game plan. And it's easy to
Yeah.
lose sight of the forest when you're in the trees.
And I
Um,
think and to have that discipline, it's hard. You got to give it the respect, the rest cycle that it deserves. And I think if you do that, then it gives you permission to obviously push on those harder weeks. But that, that's been great. I think you and I've been working together since February, maybe, or so.
no, it's actually April.
Was it April? Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it hadn't
maybe
been.
I started reading your stuff in February. That's when
Okay.
found you online.
Yeah, I think the first, if I look back here, let's go and see.
Well, that's a quicker ramp up than I recall.
Well, it was, because
Yeah.
we started in April, and my biggest thing was, and I was talking to somebody about 444, and he had assumed that I was talking about doing this myself. And I said, no, man, this guy came to me. I don't know him as an athlete yet. What my strategy is, I need to see, like, you know, where are you at? Like, I can look at old files, but it's hard to gauge, you're not usually seeing an athlete like on a training calendar. And you had said in one of the emails, I'm good at keeping to a schedule. There's a lot of people that say that they're not so good at keeping to a schedule.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, how diligent is this guy going to be? So I think the first 3 weeks they were, tempo stuff, things that should be home runs if we're going to be doing 10-hour, 12-hour, 17-hour bike rides. Can you execute some intervals? Because I still was under the kind of thought process that we were doing. Some people might approach us with just doing like, well, he's going to be sub FTP riding, we're just going to do that. I've seen more people that do the same thing over and over again. They just get blunted. They get either
Yeah.
mentally
No, I
fatigued
agree
from
with
it.
you. Yeah.
They get, the physical. We need different stimulus in life. And for cycling, I'm a huge believer of that. So I think some people would be surprised. Like, you were doing threshold stuff. You were doing maybe one block of VO2 max. But I'm in the mindset that if you can mentally understand what going hard feels like, when you're going way easier on the event day, it's going to seem way easier. Like, you were knocking
Yeah.
out some solid threshold time. And even if it wasn't, 2 by 20, it was like, hey, I got 40 minutes of threshold today. It's like, great. That's an hour that's going to be way easier on game day for you. And plus, building up that ability to ride, if something happened and you had to ride a little bit harder, or you're trying to get through a rainstorm, you can do that. You're not like, man, I've never ridden this hard before.
Oh, that triggered a thought too. So you had me do that test. What was that?
Power dip
You
test.
sent no, there was something else where you sent the file off and somebody else analyzed it and it comes back with
Oh, the inside test. Yes.
the inside test. So the benefit of that, and obviously that's for far more talented racers than I am, in terms of where I fall in that thing. But the benefit of that was, so I knew in my head from the analysis that the certain watts that basically, if you're keeping nutrition, and you could burn forever, on
Yes.
that. And so when I was getting deep on these long rides, I knew, because I'd seen the science behind that and seen the report. I was like, I'm 20 watts under what I could theoretically hold forever. So that gave me the confidence of like, just get
You
through
can
this
do it.
little rough patch here. Yeah, your body can do it. It's like you've got the ability to do it. So that thing was really valuable, and I've gone back and looked at that a few times, especially as you getting into like a new cycle and trying to figure out, all right, well, where are you? And you go back and look at that, and like, well, and they break those different graphs down. I can't even keep them in my head, but to go back and reread that file and look at it, and like that's very helpful in terms of giving
Good.
you some structural confidence of where we're going.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they downplay how much they can actually physically do, and it's really cool to see. There's different books, and there's I'm not a huge David Goggins fan, but he really started preaching a lot about how when we think we're done, we're only 40% to failure. And the cycling is a funny thing where, I mean, I've had I can't even count the number of rides where like it takes 2 hours until I start feeling good. And usually it's on a Sunday ride, like a back-to-back ride. I'm like, man, this is tough. You keep pushing through, and then you're like 60 miles in, and all of a sudden, like somebody flipped a switch. I'm like, man, I feel great right now. I
Yeah.
don't think anybody knows what that is. I think it's part of the body wants to get some rest, and you're telling, no, I'm out here riding. This is the lot. You'll rest tomorrow, but we can definitely push more than we think. And there's the head of USA Cycling, Jim Miller. I was talking to him on the phone probably maybe a month ago before he went out to Worlds, and we were talking about some training philosophies, and he really is a big believer in that like you can do more than you think, and athletes can do more. So it's good to hear you say that too. I mean, I don't know when I'll stop telling you how inspiring this ride is. It's incredible, man. I mean, I'm like, maybe I'll go ride 100 miles this weekend. That feels like nothing now. You're gonna step the bar up for so many people. It's amazing. I'm excited to see where you're at, let's say in like July next year. Um,
Right.
and the one thing too, you had talked about how when you were doing the gravel rides, you were up in Maine. So for people that do ride gravel, they know the difference that your body feels if you do 100 miles on gravel versus 100 miles on the road. Number one, you can't coast, but the physical aspect of it. But you're also pretty diligent with your weight training, which I
Yeah.
think is huge for injury prevention. But I think also when you got to go do something for over 20 hours, like you want to be strong. I think that was a really good thing that you kept.
Yeah, I don't lift with heavy weights,
Yeah,
by any, but I think the consistency, and then, uh, and I've got a little setup in my barn, so when I'm up there, I've got dogs and chickens and stuff. We got a little outdoor area. So, but I hit that stuff, and even sometimes on a weight training day, if I don't have enough time to do a 40-minute block, I'll do 20 minutes in the morning when I'm first up there, and then do 20 minutes in the evening. But yeah, to not let that day go by and be a red day, on Training Peaks, right? To
yeah,
make sure that thing's green. Um, and I think that, and that just, again, that snowballs as well.
big time.
But when we finish, when you turn off the record, I got a question I want to ask you about the future. So when we finish the recorded portion, I want to talk about that.
Sure, sure, sure,
Yeah,
sure. Well, I'm good, man. We can cut this
great.
here. And actually, I'll just clip it out from the end here. So
Okay,
man,
all right.
thank you. Well,
Well,
I'll say this. I'll say thank you for sharing all of this. I mean, this is extremely beneficial for so many people. And I'm excited to see just where things go for next year. So